Okay, so let's talk about the reverse foot setup. Now here's one of the problems I have, is that the hierarchy here for a foot is set up in such a way that it makes it really hard to animate the foot mechanics, right? Because I have a ball here that has to rotate, and I have an ankle here that has to rotate, but the thing about our foot is that we can change our pivot point. We have an ankle that's rotating, we have a ball that's rotating. We can also rotate our foot around the pivot of the ankle, and not necessarily the pivot of the ankle. We can actually do it based on the heel. So if I wanted to have this guy tapping his foot, it really wouldn't work very well because he's not really tapping his foot from the ankle. When you tap your foot, you're actually doing it from the pivot point of the heel, which we do not have a joint for. So there's a technique called the reverse foot setup, which allows us to use a reverse hierarchy to generate the ability to change the position of the foot, which is a very complex mechanism. That's why bipeds can walk easily, because we have a complex foot setup that allows us to change the pivot from where it's moving. So we do this with a special technique where we build another foot, reverse the hierarchy of that foot, and when we do so, then we create our simple IK chains that we parent into that reverse foot. So I'm going to do this for you. I've got one created here, and just unhide it. This is what it should look like. I'm just going to do this step by step so we're all familiar with how we set this up. And to do so, let's go ahead and hide our polygons because we already know where we need to put those footnodes. So I'm going to create a joint here, and I'm just going to create it here in the center of the world. Now remember, we always want to go to our channel control and make sure we can see our joint orients. For the sake of this particular demonstration, and because the reverse foot up is a very special kind of setup, we don't really need to worry about joint orients. Joint orients aren't going to be an issue with this. As long as everything is oriented somewhat with the world, we're going to make sure that our reverse foot is oriented to the world, so we won't have any values in our joint orient here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap this new joint, and I'm going to call this joint the R_RV, and that stands for reverse foot, and we'll call this the heel. And I'm going to put the Y to 0 here. Okay, now that allows me to create the heel on the ground plane. Now I can see that this guy actually has his feet under the ground plane, right under the 0. Because that is how the model is, his feet are slightly lower, I'm going to lower my joint. Generally speaking, we should have this on the ground plane, but the model was modeled slightly off the ground plane, so when we move everything up, we will move everything up from this point here, and when we do so, everything will snap to that ground plane. So as long as I have this joint at the bottom of the feet, that's what's important. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that joint, and that's our template joint. And I'm now going to snap this to my toe. Now these joints must be snapped, our secondary reverse joints. So I'm going to call this R_RV and toe. Okay, now I am going to duplicate that again, and this is going to be the ball. And this is what confuses people, is that it goes from here down, not from here to the ball. Okay, I'm going to call this the ball. This is my reverse foot ball. And actually it should be RF here, just because I'm a stickler for names. RF makes a little more sense than RV. We're not taking it across the country. We're going to animate a foot with it. Alright. There we go. So now I'm going to grab that ball and let's duplicate that again and snap it, and we'll call that ankle. RF ankle. Alright, so now we have our joints here. Now here's where the real tricky part, or at least the magic happens, is where we reverse and it's called the reverse foot because we reverse the hierarchy. So instead of doing what we do normally, which is the ankle is the parent, the ball is the child, and the toe is the child of that, we actually completely reverse this. So where the ankle, and I'm going to do this in the outliner. As you can see, it's really hard to select these and do this properly in 3D view. So I'm going to say ankle, and then I'm going to select the ball, and I'm going to parent that. So let's select the ball, and I'm going to select the toe. I'm going to parent. You see our hierarchy is happening in reverse, and you'll see why this is important in a minute. Okay, toe and the heel, parent again. All right, and here is our reverse foot structure. Looks kind of weird, like guys on a pair of ice skates. It's generally what it looks like, kind of like a pair of ice skates. All right, so now I'm just going to, and this is my old one here, the RV one. All right, let's just delete that. Now I've got this all set up. So what I'm going to do is hide that for a moment. I'm going to do a lot of hiding and unhiding, and that's why we use this outliner so we can really see where all these things are in our hierarchy, because we're going to use this to do our parenting in a second. And I'm going to create my IK handle, and for this purpose I'm going to be using single chain for the hip to the ankle, and we've done this several times so we know how this works. I'm going to do that again and do it from the ankle to the ball. One more time from the ball to the toe. And I like to name these, it's pretty important actually, so we'll call this left ankle underscore IK. Call this L ball underscore IK. And L toe IK. Alright, so now these are affecting, if we grab all three of them, oops. And obviously I don't have this, and just because I like to make sure everything is set up properly, I'm going to make sure that this joint here, my knee, is rotating in the Z-axis. That's my preferred, oops, that is not the right axis. It's the Y-axis. This one, I didn't set this one up as well as I probably could have. So that's what our preferred angle is going to be. That way, once we create these IK handles, and actually, I'm going to come back and get rid of that for a moment. And the reason is, I believe I can do that. All right, so let me change that back. And really, you only need a degree of 1 because that tells it exactly how, or maybe you don't. And let's get rid of the X and the Z, and that should give us the appropriate plane that the knee should be bending on. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is unhide my reverse foot here. And here it becomes very simple. We're going to parent in our IK handles to the appropriate joint in the reverse foot setup. So I'm going to select, now I'm going to open this here so I can see all of these, because I'm going to grab my ankle IK handle, and I want to put this under, so I'm going to grab this plus my reverse foot ankle, and I'm going to parent it. Now I'm going to do the same with the ball. I select the ball IK handle, I select the RF ball joint, and I hit P, which is the shortcut for parent. And then I select my left toe IK handle and my reverse foot toe. I'm putting this in the reverse order, and it kind of makes no sense for a moment until we see exactly how it's affected by our reverse foot. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hide these because I no longer want to see my IK handles. They're being controlled by these joints. Alright, so what is this weird hierarchy going to do for us? Let's bring up our polygon here. Alright, well first of all, if you notice, and let's just turn this grid off so it's a little bit easier to see. Now I have a position where I can rotate this from the heel. Right? Pretty cool. Couldn't do that before. Guy wants to tap his foot to some music. There you go. Rotate his foot from the heel. But we also get some other really cool features. Select the toe here. And wow, now I can rotate his entire foot from the toe. Now we can kind of push this toe around. Let's say he was making an image, and generally Spider-Man doesn't do this, but if he really has to pee badly, well, there you go. Now we can bend in that foot. Okay, but we also get that good old ball roll, right? And we can roll that foot upward, and we can rotate it around. facing the ball. And generally, we don't really rotate that if we break our foot. So now, let's select our foot here. And now we can move it from the heel. And I'm not sure what I did here, but it looks a little crimped. There we go. Looks a little unpleasant. And that's a skin weighting thing. I should probably go in and tweak the weights of this guy a little bit. And as you can see, a really important thing is that I can change the orientation of my foot really easily. And I have a lot more control over the foot than I would have. What's the toe here? One of the things I'm used to the previous setup to this used the ball for most of these translations. So I've got a lot of control over this foot here by reversing the hierarchy. So let's grab that ball and roll that sucker back down. So remember, when you create a foot, the foot has to locomote. In order to locomote, that toe has to roll. And we used to use something called a rolling foot setup, but now we've got this really nice, oops, let's select that heel here, top of the hierarchy. We have this really nice control where we can do a lot of animation work that creates a realistic foot mechanism from creating that reverse foot setup. So once again, here's how the hierarchy is set up here. So you have the heel, the toe, the ball, and the ankle, and the root of this entire thing. And keep in mind, this is not part of our skeleton, right? Because it's a separate hierarchy, it has to be outside the main skeleton. So if we select our root node here, it will remain where it is. It's kind of like using that sticky formulation. It will remain where it is because it's outside of the hierarchy, and we can animate it separately. And sometimes it gets really hard to select that, so I generally select that from the outline. So if you want Spider-Man to tiptoe, very easy to set that up. Rotate that a little bit. And this is also pretty hard to actually rotate, like if you wanted to stamp out a cigarette. It's the kind of motion that you would use with this reverse foot setup. It makes it really easy to do, whereas previously it was not so easy to do. Alright, that is the reverse foot setup.